Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gostola. I'm the managing editor for shadowproof.com, also the curator of the Dissenter newsletter, which you can find at thedissenter.org, the URL at the bottom of the screen here. As you are watching this video, please subscribe to this channel so you can get alerts for future videos that are posted. This is a live broadcast, but I'm doing it at an odd time just so I can quickly lay down some coverage of the decision by Russia President Vladimir Putin to grant NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden citizenship in the country. And it's my understanding that he applied and sought this citizenship before the war in Ukraine was launched, before the preemptive invasion into Ukraine. But that's coloring a lot of people's responses to this. But it's always been the case that Edward Snowden was unfairly maligned because of the fact that he was living in Russia. And so we'll get to some of those issues in a moment, but there is the dissenter.org where you can subscribe. I cover issues of whistleblowing constantly through this newsletter, followed Edward Snowden's case and other whistleblower cases, as well as the case against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. And so with that said, the news out as reported by the New York Times and other outlets is that President Vladimir Putin has granted Russian citizenship to Edward Snowden. And if you're angry about this, if you're angry that Edward Snowden is now a Russian citizen because you're angry at what Russia is doing to Ukraine, then you should be angry that Edward Snowden cannot come back to the United States and live here. You should be angry that he is not welcome here in the United States, because even though he exposed mass surveillance that was being conducted by the National Security Agency in concert with other agencies in partnership with European agencies, that was directed and hoovering up the communications records of millions of citizens, not just in the United States, but the entire globe, systematically violating their privacy rights. Even though he exposed that and gave us a greater understanding of how these systems operate, how they are targeted against us, he cannot come home and live in the United States without being subject to an Espionage Act trial in which he could potentially go to prison for decades if he is convicted. I mean, we don't know. This is highly sensitive. We're talking about communications intelligence in some cases that can't even be discussed in open court. He would have no opportunity for a public interest defense if put on trial. And this has been discussed over and over again. So people who are apoplectic that he now has Russia's citizenship today, don't let them forget the fact that they know very well the reason why he is going to live as a Russia citizen in the in Russia is because his country has insisted. This started in 2013. Nearly a decade later, they've insisted on continuing to pursue his prosecution despite what it has done to improve our knowledge, despite the reforms that have been spurred, despite all of the positives that can be referenced by civil liberties organizations, and even members of Congress who passed something called the USA Freedom Act because they were spurred to action from the disclosures that were the subject of Pulitzer Prize winning journalism that was done by Glenn Greenwald, Laura Poitras, Ewan McCaskill, and then there were other reporters as well, I believe, who shared in that Pulitzer Prize. And that reporting is why we know what we know today. It led to a surge in interest in encryption and privacy tools for people to use, for consumers to use. And it even became part of Apple's branding. They now sell privacy to people, but they weren't doing that before Edward Snowden stepped forward. And yet, now he is going to be treated as if this is confirmation that he has been a spy for Russia all along, when in fact, people should know that he was trapped in Russia because the State Department revoked his passport when he was fleeing Hong Kong, when he was on that flight, when he came and he was transiting through the airport in Moscow, and he was hoping to go on another flight and head to a country, head to Ecuador. His final destination was not Russia. His final destination was not Moscow. He did not intend to become a Russian citizen. He intended to be living somewhere else, and at best, he hoped that he could come back home after negotiating with the Justice Department and find a resolution so that he could stay a U.S. citizen who was contributing to, the security and well-being of all of us by informing us of the ways that the NSA was violating our privacy. He believed he was helping us to protect ourselves. So this news says that he applied. He said he was applying in 2020. He described the decision as a practical measure to give his family greater freedom crossing borders. His request was granted by Putin in a decree that was dated on Monday. It was published. He's among dozens of foreigners granted citizenship in the decree. So this wasn't just solely singling out Putin as if to poke the eye of the United States government. Being treated like a kind of tit for a tat within the context of the war in Ukraine, but it seems like it could probably have happened regardless of whether there was this conflict that has shaken the entire globe for this past year. The New York Times write-up is actually pretty good. I'm going to get to the Washington Post coverage. It's not good. It's pretty awful. But they do a good job here of quoting a Russian state-owned news agency where Anatoly Kucherena, who is Snowden's lawyer, was quoted as saying that he is not eligible for the partial mobilization that Putin has declared, which, we were seeing something horrific happen. It's unfolding in the country where people who are refusing to go fight in Ukraine are being arrested and they're sent to jail. And we're told that they could be imprisoned for up to 15 years for refusing to fight. I live here in the United States, and the history of this country, if we go back to the Vietnam War, people were draft resistors, and they were very righteous in their decision that they were not going to go overseas and fight in that war. And I would happen to believe that it's also a good thing that people in Russia are resisting the fight. And I think that that doesn't really mean that, that doesn't really mean that Russia is going to now be able to turn around and make Snowden a part of this mobilization. The fact that we are seeing this happen in Russia. And as you're seeing here, it says that Snowden was ineligible for the draft because he has no experience in the Russian army. There's nothing in the New York Times report to counter that, to say that that's not a true statement from Snowden's attorney. So his wife has applied. He has children. So I presume they were born there. So these are all people with Russian citizenship now. And he had permanent residency. He was living under permanent residency in Russia. And he had said on Twitter that he would remain American, that he's raising his son with all the values of the America he loves, and that includes the freedom to speak his mind. And I look forward to the day I can return to the States so the whole family can be reunited. And so for the time being, this is the life that he leads. This is the life that he leads. It's not the life that he chose, but it's the life of somebody who's caught in the gears of so-called great power competition. This is what the U.S. empire has brought to all of us. This is what U.S. NATO has brought forward. And this is what a U.S. that is committed to countering Russia and countering China has brought to us. This is what Snowden has found himself ensnared in, so to speak. And so I want to play the video here of let's read the Washington Post's coverage first here, because the Washington Post coverage, even though they actually were somewhat of a partner when it came to publishing these documents, they take a different tack. This comes from Mary Ilyushina, and the headline was Putin grants citizenship to Edward Snowden, who disclosed U.S. surveillance. Russian President Vladimir Putin is granted citizenship on Monday to Edward Snowden, the former security consultant who leaked information about top secret U.S. surveillance programs and is still wanted by Washington on espionage charges. Well, first off, they're Espionage Act charges. He's not wanted for espionage. He did not commit espionage against the United States. He is a whistleblower who exposed these documents that your newspaper published, that your newspaper got awards for publishing and sharing stories about the violation of rights to privacy that were ongoing and the power that was being abused by the NSA. He was a security consultant for the NSA at the time. He was not just, I mean, I don't know, that lead is bullshit because I don't know who he was working for. Why won't they put what agency he was working for? He was working for the NSA. Snowden, 39, was one of 72 foreigners granted citizenship in a decree that was signed by Putin. Snowden, who considers himself a whistleblower, fled the United States to avoid prosecution and has been living in Russia, which granted him asylum in 2013. He was granted permanent residency in 2020, and his lawyer said at the time he was applying to obtain a Russian passport without renouncing his U.S. citizenship. Okay, so they quote Kucherina. Then they go down to how White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre declined to comment and instead referred questions to prosecutors. And she said, so since I believe there have been criminal charges against him, we would point you to the Department of Justice. Then Snowden's revelations, they mentioned, were arguably the biggest security breach in U.S. history. All right, so rather than framing this as something that was a gift to civil libertarians for improving what we understood about how Fourth Amendment rights were being violated, how the Constitution was being undermined, the Washington Post and Guardian, I guess, were led to believe published these stories so that they could show the extent of this massive security breach. The information he disclosed revealed top secret NSA surveillance as part of a program known as PRISM and the extraction of a wide range of digital information. Extraction? Like that's the language of accusing somebody of being a spy. He didn't extract this information so that he could go give it to the Kremlin or to give it to the government of Russia. He didn't give it to any government. He didn't give it to any Chinese people running the government. He didn't flee to Hong Kong so that he could inform Chinese officials of the extensive network. He took this information and he gave it to journalists, and then we used it to improve our understanding of mass surveillance systems. What is PRISM? PRISM, tell people what PRISM is. PRISM was this program that was going through people's social media activities, rifling through their accounts and collecting all manner of data about what they were doing on these social media applications. In 2017, Putin said in a documentary film made by U.S. director Oliver Stone that he did not consider Snowden a traitor for leaking government secrets. Well, neither does many Americans. There is no clear majority of people who think that he is a traitor. That's not a Putin view. That is what should be the dominant worldview, because Snowden is not a traitor. And in fact, what just took place on in early September, Morning Consult did a poll, and they polled people and they asked, in the United States, they asked 1,000 U.S. adults. They said, Edward Snowden is a patriot who sought to protect the privacy and freedom of American citizens. Do you agree? 34% said they did. But then they asked, Edward Snowden is a spy who sought to undermine the American government and intelligence agencies. Less, 31%, said that's what they believed. 35% said they don't know, no opinion. Okay, so either people think he's a patriot who sought to protect the privacy and freedom of Americans, or they don't know anything about him. But they certainly do not endorse the idea that he's a traitor. And so, despite the best efforts of the US government and journalists and some people who are aligned with defense connected or military connected think tanks, they have not been able to wholly discredit Snowden in the eyes of the American people. They do not think that Edward Snowden is a traitor. In fact, they actually don't know a lot about him, which is good because that means that we can insert some of the reality into the conversation. So, if you keep going down in this, the final part of this article is to say that it says he saw his decision to seek dual citizenship was because he had been separated from his parents, and my wife and I have no desire to be separated from our son. That's why in this era of pandemics and closed borders, we are applying for dual U.S. Russian citizenship. Lindsay and I will remain Americans, and we'll raise our son with all the values of the America we love, and that part I already told you. So let's look at some of these comments that have been shared by individuals who have prominent Twitter accounts, and they are using their platforms in order to smear and share really unfounded and misinformed statements about Snowden today. So here's Paul Rykoff, who I guess follows me. I didn't know that he followed me, but he is a known person for standing up for veterans. And so he says, in case any of you Snowden defenders still questioned where his loyalty lies, this is Putin playing Putin games. Fuckery always. It would be justice if Snowden was deployed to the front by Russia, captured by Ukraine, and returned to the US to be tried. And then he has that emoji of the fingers crossed. This is despicable. This is awful, Paul. This is really, really fucked up shit. I mean, honestly, you know as well as anyone, and you have access to the information about what Snowden did and didn't do, and you follow me, so you probably have seen it in your feed before. You know what Snowden is and is not, and the idea that you're playing into this garbage about Snowden somehow being some pawn of Putin is despicable. It's absolutely despicable. So here we have someone who I'm not sure should know better. And in fact, I don't know a whole lot about them, but I do know that he's an MSNBC analyst. So that means that he falls for all of this crap. And that's Fernand R. Amandi, who has over 100,000 followers. I only go after people who have lots of followers and have the ability to influence people with these statements. These tweets get shared pretty widely, like this one. He says, of course, Putin did. Snowden is being rewarded with Russian citizenship because Edward Snowden is a traitor to the United States. I mean, if you have a pea brain in your skull, that is why. That is exactly why Edward Snowden has been granted Russian citizenship. But if you're capable of complex thoughts and ideas, then you know that he is in Russia because that's where he ended up trapped, because the U.S. State Department revoked his passport, and that's where he's been living because he can't come back home. If you think he should be coming back home to stand trial, then say that. That's your view. Your view is that he should come and subject himself. He should martyr himself and be put on trial, and he should expose himself to further legal jeopardy, and he should go to jail. He should be in a U.S. prison, which we know the state of prisons in our mass incarceration system. In the case of Assange's extradition, a judge ruled that they were so cruel and inhuman that if he was extradited to the United States, Julian Assange would probably try to kill himself because he has mental health issues. But yeah, Edward Snowden should take a fucking risk, and he should go to the United States, and he should subject himself to an unfair trial where he can't put on a public interest defense just so that he can make sure he stays pure and isn't a so-called traitor to the United States, even though his government wants nothing to do with him and thinks that he betrayed them. All the while, they're adopting modest reforms to the system because they no longer can defend what was exposed. Yeah, so this is the level of discourse that we have on Twitter right now. And Tristan Snell takes it up a notch. He takes it from just garbage to batshit crazy. And this person has nearly 300,000 followers. He's a founder of Main Street Law, and he's a commentator on MSNBC and CNN. So he's got access to the cable news networks. And he says, did Putin just let Snowden become a Russian citizen so that Trump would feel reassured about doing the same? Trump remains a severe flight risk. Not only can he not be allowed to leave America, he cannot be allowed to go to any country's embassy or consulate. All right, so this is now about Trump. Everything in the minds of these people is not much different from what we see with QAnon. Their constant obsession with Trump and the theories that they are constantly spinning through their Twitter accounts. So somehow he can't comment on Snowden without making it about how Trump is a severe flight risk now. And so this is not somebody who has a clear head to address what is unfolding with Snowden. And I'm not even willing to give him credit. Like I would give credit to Paul Rykoff, but I won't give credit to Tristan. I think he is ignorant and probably does not know the history of this case against Edward Snowden. Then this is Charlotte Clymer. Okay, so she has nearly 400,000 followers, and she'll represent the elite white feminist viewpoints that are out there against Edward Snowden. She is a Biden supporter, and she's Team Blue. And this is what she has to say. Snowden receiving Russian citizenship directly from Putin and thus implicitly endorsing his brutal invasion of Ukraine. How does getting citizenship endorse a brutal invasion of Ukraine? I mean, that's just, I'm a citizen of my country. Should I renounce my citizenship because of all of the carnage and bloodshed that we've committed for the last 20 years? You know what? Why don't you renounce your citizenship in the United States, Charlotte, if this is the standard that you're going to apply? Try to have some nuance to the way that you address what these events are that are unfolding. The least surprising thing to anyone who's been paying attention, she says, the guy is a hack and you're sure as hell not going to see him mobilized to the front lines. Well, no, you're not going to see him mobilized to the front lines because he's not ever been in the Russian army and they're not going to go after him and try to make him fight in the war in Ukraine. And also they know he has no allegiance to Russia. So to ask him to do that would be a really stupid thing to do, because then he's just going to find some way to flee Russia, or they're going to end up jailing Snowden, and that's not going to be good for Russia, because that would be a really, really boneheaded thing for the Russian government to do. All right. So, and then the other part of that message was, and you're not going to hear a damn whisper of condemnation from every hypocrite who tried to turn Snowden into a moral beacon, even after years of endorsing Putin's despotism. That would take good faith and humility, both of which are lacking among his fan base. But I don't remember at any time Snowden endorsing Putin's despotism. I'm not sure what Charlotte is referring to, and there's nothing specific in that tweet. So it's hard to see it as nothing more than a bunch of bad faith gibberish that is a virtue signal to her own followers, just, to give them a way to be angry about Snowden. And like I said, if you're angry that he's been lost and he's no longer living in the United States and that he's now been pushed into the arms of Russia, so to speak, if that's what citizenship represents to you, then blame the U.S. government. Blame the U.S. government for doing this, because this could have been avoided if the U.S. government had made different decisions. At any point in time, Donald Trump could have pardoned Snowden. The Republicans could have let Donald Trump pardon Snowden, and the Democrats could have encouraged the pardoning of Edward Snowden. Barack Obama could have pardoned Edward Snowden or commuted his sentence, just like, or commuted and just ended the prosecution at the same time that he commuted the sentence against Chelsea Manning, but that was a choice. They said they weren't going to do that. So, if you don't believe the lawyer for Snowden, then at least believe it in Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which is state-funded U.S. media. They have decided to share what Snowden's lawyer is saying. They're saying that he won't be eligible for being called up in a partial mobilization for the war in Ukraine, and so that means that Edward Snowden is not going to go to the front lines. So despite your fantasies, your sick fucking fantasies that you want to see a whistleblower get conscripted to the front lines to have to fight in Ukraine, despite that, I don't think you're going to get to see this. But, it would be something. It would be something, because if he got conscripted, he might be able to go face Malcolm Nance, who has taken up arms with Ukrainians, and maybe they would come face to face. And that guy has had nothing but loads and loads and loads of bullshit to say about Snowden in this case, including trying to divide Reality Winner's family and make them no longer be supporters of Edward Snowden, even though Edward Snowden had shown Reality Winner unwavering support through everything that she had been through as she was prosecuted by the U.S. Justice Department. So we'll take that down. I've got one video to show, and then I'm going to hop off here. But let's just see. So we got some good comments from people. I'm following your responses here, and someone is saying, James is saying, Snowden claimed the leaks so no one else would be blamed. If he's tried on espionage charges, he's more or less already pled guilty. He can't present exposing government crime as a defense. Yep. Thanks, James. And we all should be seeking to make an escape from all these places, really. All right, so I'm going to play this clip that we have here before I hop off. And it is from the State Department. This is Matthew Lee, who is, I believe, still with the Associated Press. He's been a longtime presence at State Department briefings. A lot of clips that go viral end up featuring him because he has good questions. And this is him asking State Department spokesperson and tool Ned Price about Edward Snowden.
But you've seen President Putin giving Russian citizenship to Edward Snowden. Back in 2013, when you guys, this building, the State Department, during the Obama administration, revoked his passport, it was made clear by one of your predecessors that this did not affect his citizenship, that he was still, as far as the U.S. government is concerned, an American citizen. And I just want to know if that is still, and I'm not asking about any kind of prosecution, so please don't refer me to the Justice Department. Is it still the belief of the administration that he is a U.S. citizen?
I'm not aware of any change in his citizenship status. I am familiar with the fact that he has in some ways denounced his American citizenship. I don't know that he's renounced it.
Right. Well, no, he hasn't. And in fact, when he applied for citizenship, he said he wasn't going to renounce it. But but there are ways in which the U.S. government can revoke one's citizenship. And as far as I know, he doesn't meet any of the, or hasn't met any of the criteria yet. One of the four is committing an act of treason, which I know you'll refer to the Justice Department on. But I just want to make sure that as far as you're concerned, he remains an American citizen. So he's now a dual U.S. Russian citizen.
Our position has not changed. Mr. Snowden should return to the United States, where he should face justice as any other American citizen would. Perhaps the only thing that has changed is that as a result of his Russian citizenship, apparently now he may well be conscripted to fight in Russia's war in Ukraine.
Right.
It's a total tool. I mean, Ned's the guy who in your office would totally narc on one of your coworkers and say they're leaving their lunch in the fridge and letting it go bad and get stinky and smelly just so he could suck up to the boss and make sure that he got into better graces with them so that he could have a better chance at upward career mobility. That's the kind of person that Ned Price is. You just feel it. I mean, he is just the most groveling kind of individual, bootlicker of the highest order. And no, Edward Snowden is not going to be conscripted to the front lines. It sounds slick. Someone probably prepared the line for you and you delivered it pretty well, Ned, but it's not true. Edward Snowden is not going to go to the front lines and fight. I don't even know if he's medically able to do so. He had an injury when he was in the military, major leg injury. So I don't even know if he would clear the medical exam and be allowed to go fight on the front lines. He may not even be able to run in combat. So there's that. And then this idea that Edward Snowden renounced or denounced his citizenship is bonkers. He never did. There's anywhere you cannot find any place where he has renounced his citizenship or denounced it. That is some kind of smear that is now being very softly peddled by the State Department after what has happened here, because look, they know that they're never going to bring Snowden to trial. He has won at a cost to his reputation. He has won. He has escaped. He has avoided what they have been able to do to, around a dozen people in the last 10 to 15 years have gone through horrible Espionage Act prosecutions that have destroyed their lives, wrecked their families, wrecked their income, their careers, made it impossible for them to live, forced them into rebuilding their lives from the ground up. They've been sent to prison. They've been smeared as traitors. Even without being in Russia, they were smeared as traitors and spies, and they were subject to abuse in prison. They were denied medical care in prison. All sorts of things that have happened to these people. And he avoided that. He was not made an example out of. They failed in making an example out of Edward Snowden. They wanted nothing more than to make an example out of him, but he dodged them. And WikiLeaks helped him dodge the United States government, but they sort of got him, right? Because they kept him in Russia. He was not allowed to go on to Ecuador. We'd be having a much different conversation right now if he was an Ecuadorian citizen. He actually would not be treated the way he is. We would not view him through this lens that is being applied, where we're putting this gloss on his case that comes from Russia's war in Ukraine, and also using it to color our understanding of U.S. NATO's actions in Ukraine as well. I would add. I think there's a flip side. Although the people who are opposed to Snowden are all the people who see no nuance to the conflict at all, and you don't see them trying to figure out when we're going to pursue diplomacy and wind this conflict down and stop what is happening, which is having great impact to all of the countries of the world through Europe. All continents are impacted by what is happening, but it's better to call people names, and it's better to engage in this immature discourse that we see on Twitter that pretends like we don't really know the truth of what Edward Snowden did. But we know exactly what Edward Snowden did. And I think it is to be honored and celebrated, regardless of the fact that he is a Russian citizen. And I'm not saying that just because, none of this is said because, despite him being a Russian citizen, he is a person who was a whistleblower. No. He is a whistleblower, and he has sought Russian citizenship because his country will not welcome him home. It's that simple. I mean, that represents the nuance of the moment, is that the politics do not support him returning home. Now they have tarred him as someone who is working for Russia or is a Russian spy, or they've made him seem like he's a Russian spy, and they're comfortable with that. It makes them feel like they have won, even though I think deep down the Justice Department and their prosecutors know that they're never going to get to put him on trial, and the NSA is never going to get to put him on trial and see him prosecuted, and so that means they lost. They lost. And what he did is always going to stand for what it was, which is that and this is what the ACLU said when they argued for a pardon. A federal appeals court found that the NSA's mass phone surveillance program was illegal. The Congress passed an intelligence reform bill. And it's the first time in 40 years that anything was done to reform the security state. Though it was modest and maybe minimal, it's a big deal that something happened. Polls showed that there was a big change in privacy. I already told you Apple was selling privacy to people because of Edward Snowden. Tech companies like Apple and Facebook were making encryption available and doing things to encrypt their services. And that had not happened before. American companies and the government were now looking at the ways that these back doors that were left open for the NSA could be manipulated. And then so those were the range of things that we can say on a basic level were great for improving our understanding of the way the national security state operates in our country and globally. And so now he is a Russian citizen, and that is something that we should wrestle with. The fact that somebody who is a dissident would have to flee the United States and there would not be a place for them here in this country is, I think, a statement it says more about the United States than it does anything about Russia or anything about what Putin might be up to as the leader of that country. So with that said, I will wrap this up. Thank you for tuning in to this. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I am the curator of a newsletter called thedissenter.org. I was just putting out this video to respond to some of the babble that is out there about Edward Snowden seeking citizenship. There needs to be some sense, some clarity here on why Snowden would want citizenship. And I've made it pretty clear. And so if you go to this site, you can sign up for the newsletter if you're not. And also I encourage you to hit the subscribe button and follow this channel. There'll be future videos. Perhaps there'll be more on this if this isn't the end of it, if there's some more to the backlash. But I'll also have future videos on the Assange case and other whistleblower cases and other stories that I cover. And then there's the weekly unauthorized disclosure podcast that I post to this channel, which there's a free edition that you can tune into on a regular basis. Thank you all for tuning into this stream, and I'll be back soon with some more good content.